I'll try not to go into too much technical detail. It'll be more looking at some of the practicalities of implementation, and I'll take questions at the end. Essentially, when you're going into to apply for a CCTV systems grant, you'll be going through a number of steps. And many of those steps are outlined quite well in the guide to developing CCTV for public safety. So that's a good document to start with. Read it well. The brown areas, I assume, would be covered during the preparation of the grant, considerations of budget, legal, technical and other considerations. I'm going to focus in on the black text areas, so what functional, technical and support requirements you might want to consider, and some of the through-life support required for the systems. So we start with a system design philosophy, and that should underpin really what you want to get out of the system you're going to deploy. And I think it's already been said a number of times that CCTV is just one part of the solution. It's not a panacea. So don't expect to see a miraculous reduction in crime and antisocial behaviour because you put cameras in. We want to try and improve the perception of public safety, but that's not just achieved by having cameras up there. Better lighting, better urban design, better sight lines in your public spaces. They're all factors which will enhance that. So in deterring, displacing crime, I think having more frequent foot patrols by police is probably a good start. Cameras won't have the same effect. We want to provide usable and high quality evidence, and I'll get to that further in the presentation. There's no point putting a very cheap system in that's not going to get you the quality of imagery you need to prosecute. You need a decent system. We'll deal with that further. We want to integrate the systems with the environment. So if you've got a new urban precinct, you don't want to have large boxes with cameras in them sitting prominently everywhere. I think architecturally it's not good, and it really needs to be a little more discreet than that. We want to consider all those requirements, what the users need, so both the operators of the system, the maintainers, what the planners, the statutory people need from the system. We want to understand the constraints that the system or the technology presents, and we either mitigate any of those constraints or we design them out. And we want to make sure that support for the system is straightforward, so that if you have a problem it can be resolved quickly and fairly painlessly with minimum impact on the public if it's in a public space. So you don't want to have a bucket truck, for example, parking in the middle of a mall to get access to a camera. You want to be able to work out how you're going to maintain the system once it's in place. So I'll just run through now the basic elements, if people aren't familiar with them. We start with the cameras, in this case IP, Internet Protocol, or digital cameras, which are routed or switched to a recording device which can be monitored locally, or it can be remotely monitored through connections via the internet or a wide area network, corporate network, to end devices such as personal smartphones or tablets, notebooks, or to a control and monitoring system, maybe a security system somewhere in council's domain or another domain that you specify. These they can be wired or wireless. These can be wired or wireless, as you can see there. So there's flexibility in how you design the network to suit the environment. When you're talking about choosing cameras, as I said, you choose the cheapest because you can get it within budget. You're not necessarily going to get the best result. You need to look at a whole bunch of different factors, including the areas that need coverage, and you will have selected that based on a crime statistics review of what the main dimensions of crime are in the particular precinct. You want to know what level of detail you wish, whether you want to be able to tell who someone is by their face, get facial recognition when you replay the video, or whether you just want a group shot. So you want to see what broad action is taking place, for example, so police can look at the monitor and work out if there's an incident developing and then take action. Or whether you want something that goes from that one extreme to the other. So you might want a PTZ, pan tilt zoom camera, that allows you to move around an entire area to support operations, whether it's police or council operations. the distance from the camera to the target area, and the streetscape. So if you have a street front that you want to surveil, a long mall, you may want to use one camera rather than having 3 or 4 along that, but you may have some trees or building facades in that mall, or you might have development work that's going on. So you actually will not be able to get the full view down that street. You might have to have multiple cameras rather than just one. So you need to work out how you're going to cover the area properly, whether one camera will do it. The camera housing itself, you have to choose based on the environment. So if you suspect there's going to be a vandalism risk in that area, then you choose a more robust or resilient housing. If there's higher levels of dust or humidity, then you choose an appropriate housing that's well sealed, and you make sure the installer who does the work complies with the requirements for the manufacturer to keep the rating for the housing. So that will enable the life of the camera to be extended. You want to have the quality of work in installation to support the quality of the technology that you're buying. As I said, if there's operational use required from a central monitoring recording location, then you need to decide whether you want PTZs on either side of the mall or either end of the mall with a zoom capability as well as a pan capability. If it's just fixed cameras, and I'd recommend these for main entry points, if you're going to get facial recognition, you really want a fixed camera with a high resolution on a main entry point. So you have to choose the technology for the application. And planned system life is important. If you want a maintenance-free system for 10 years, then you have to pay more up front. Network selection is another dimension to the puzzle. A lot of councils want to put these systems in, but they don't have infrastructure already in place. So they might have a limited amount of copper or cabling in a particular street. They want to put a camera or cameras in another location, but connecting those up is difficult because they just don't have the direct connectivity. So you don't want to have to go through Telstra and spend $500,000 routing cable through their pipes. So what are the options? So if you want to have a centralised monitoring and recording location, for instance, if the police are going to be involved in monitoring the system and reacting to it, then you'll need to have connection to that point. You can't have standalone CCTV recording on SD cards or SDXC cards. You need to have it centrally monitored and recorded. What existing infrastructure do you have? Do you have fibre? Do you have copper? Do you have any wireless systems already? What's the existing legacy systems in the council? Do you have any poles or pathways that you might use in council's domain so you don't have to pay leasing costs for those that you can easily access? That's another cost dimension. How far are the cameras away from where you want to record or monitor? And are they in a grouped area, or are they in disparate locations all around a suburb or a central shopping precinct? And what is the council looking at in terms of growth of the system? Is there likely to be an extension of that shopping precinct or mall or the high density residential where you might want to have more cameras in future? Can the system accommodate those, and what would be the planning to support that? I guess where I'm heading with those questions, which is probably what council needs to be asking their designer integrator, is, well, how do I future-proof? How do I get the most cost-effective solution? Do I use wireless, which doesn't need to run on cable over poles and leased assets, which can be repositioned? If I want to shift the cameras around, I can actually shift the wireless system to a different location. It gives me some flexibility. There are a range of advantages and disadvantages to each, so they should be considered. System powering is a potentially problematic one, particularly if you're trying to look at powering a remote site such as a park or a pathway in a park. You want to monitor an isolated area where there's been some incidents of assault or drug use or drug dealing. How do you do that? There's costs associated with civil and electrical works. For trenching through parks is a public amenity issue for starters, some public safety issues to deal with. pole leasing costs. When you want to plug into the mains power, the power supplier has to do that at the pole. They're costs that the council will incur. So you may want to consider solar. Traffic management, memorandums of understanding and rights of way are also other issues that will need to be dealt with. If I say solar, people instantly think, well, it's going to be a lot of clutter around the site because you're going to have 2 by 1 metre solar panels. I think people have become more used to them. They're around on the automated street signs, the variable street signs. So they're in use. They're a highly reliable, long life option. They're about 25 years minimum for the performance of those panels. But there are costs in terms of the batteries and the cycle of replacement of those that you have to consider. So again, it's a through life costing exercise and looking at those options with the designer integrator and coming up with a solution that suits council. There are options also if you to try and get a lower power system, get a more energy friendly solution. So you don't use as much power, therefore your power budget's less, the size of your battery installation for solar is less. Potentially you could have the camera activate from low power when it senses movement. So if it's an area where you're interested only in something happening, for instance at a depot where you're looking at protecting assets, and I know this isn't public safety, but if it's an asset protection issue, then you could use movement sensing rather than full-time recording to trigger the recording cycle of the camera. 1 month storage is probably what I'd say minimum acceptable. They're certainly used in the rail network or mass transit environment. That's the national standard. But if you're going to preserve evidence, you don't want it to be overwritten by rapidly accumulating newer evidence within a week, say. So you want to have a decent level of archiving available. So you want to preserve the evidence. Do you do that locally in the camera? If you don't want to pay for a network to get your camera's video back to a central point, you can do it locally, but there are issues with that. The recording period, 31 days, and the video quality. If you want very high quality video for 31 days, you're going to need a lot more storage. So you need to dimension or configure your system to give you the right storage. And that's a cost, again, you're going to have to come up with. You have to have protocols to work within, and I think that's clearly enunciated in the guidelines. But you've also got the issue when you've got cameras that are standalone and you've got the storage on the camera, which you can get, and you can get 128 gigabyte SD cards now, and they can hold a month's recording of a reasonable quality video in the camera if you want to go a standalone, but you've then got to get it off the camera if you want to analyse the video. So you've got to get someone to get up to the camera, get it out with another person to witness that, take it to the police so they can actually read it. So there's different ways you can do it. You don't necessarily need to have a network, but there are other costs and that will come to the fore, or logistics issues, if you do a standalone installation. And if you have standalone cameras, you can't control them remotely, so that you don't have a PTZ option, and you don't have the monitoring capability as well. Environmental factors, trees and sculptures. We had a case in Laverton where there was a sculpture that was erected in Laverton railway station which blocked the camera completely once it was put up, so no one had thought about it. Trees grow, they don't, unless they're plastic. And if someone puts up temporary scaffolding, then maybe that council needs to work out whether they need to pay the cost of relocating the camera if it's a critical area. So we have the issue of light, line of sight being required. You've got to be able to see the target, so the camera has to be able to see the target. As was mentioned, you actually can get good performance out of cameras down to a very low light level, a level at which I couldn't read the documents on the desk here. Your camera performance to colour will be fine, but the variability in the lighting is important. So as I said before, if you're in a park and you want to get a view down a pathway in daytime or nighttime, then shading in under trees will create a massive variance in the illumination, and the camera will have a problem picking up people in that shaded area. So if assaults occur in there, you won't be able to get the evidence. So you need uniform illumination or very low transitions in, or slow transitions in illumination to get good camera performance. The absolute level of lighting can be quite low, but the variability in lighting needs to be very uniform, minimised. So we want to make sure people are aware they're being watched. We've got to have signs. We're going to have, possibly want to have the cameras visible, but in newer developments you may want to have more subtle cameras integrated into the environment. So the designer or the consultant needs to take that into account when they talk to council about their requirements and make sure that those priorities are integrated in their design brief when they come back to council with their final system design and the integration solution. They should be doing that for you. And as I said before, if the environment is changing, if you've got new developments happening, then consider the effect of those on your CCTV system. I'll quickly go through these. Maintenance strategy. If you've got a system needs to be maintained well to keep it running to its initial specification, which you may have a consultant prepare, or you might get the integrator to prepare as part of their tender. They might write the spec and you might sign it off. But to keep it running, you need to maintain it, service it, clean it. And that might involve getting up there, removing cobwebs, dusting both the housing lens or glass and the camera lens within that housing. You might want to service the camera. You might have to upgrade the software in the camera if there's a bug, heaven forbid. At the moment, there are a whole range of different software products that manage CCTV and security systems, ranging from very simple network video recorder, digital video recorder ones, right up to multi-server environments where you can run multiple applications to analyse the data coming in, evaluate the performance of the cameras, and they can tell you whether a camera's got its image or standard reference image has changed from when you actually put it there to what it is today. So if there's a spider web in front of it, it will send you an alarm telling you there's a problem with this camera. So you can go out and service it as you require. Now, that might be good if you've got lots of money. If you haven't got much money, then a regular service schedule would be better. So 3 monthly or 6 monthly schedules, see how that goes. If you're still getting good performance without cleaning them after 3 to 4 months, then maybe give it another 2. Then it might be just see how you go, but I'd recommend 6 monthly as a maximum for cleaning camera lenses. And also when you go out to tender, ask the tenderers to give you a package maintenance deal. So for all the cameras on the system, for the network infrastructure, for the switches, for the computers, the archivers, etc., get them to provide you with a full managed service for 5 years, because if you haven't got the staff in your organisation who are competent in this, and I'm not saying that the guys who run the IT desk in council aren't competent, but some of these systems have another level of complexity, so perhaps it's worthwhile considering that, or training your people specifically so they've got the skills to run the system. Particularly where you have an interface with the police and they've got problems, you want to have a protocol for response times, and it might be better to get the people who supply the system to respond rather than the council tech, because then you're going to really frustrate the CEO when his computer goes down, the IT guy's not there. So there's some other practical considerations.
On one of the earlier slides, you showed images being sent to a smartphone.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I just wonder, in terms of security and compliance, whether that's acceptable?
It would, for a public organisation, I'd say it would be on the margins of acceptability. For a small business operator, and I know a number who have their CCTV imagery sent to their phone as a business security measure, but it would have to be done in accordance with the protocols, privacy protocols and access protocols for the organisation. It would depend how well it could be encrypted, and that would need some design effort to make sure the encryption on the footage is acceptable. But it may not be something you'd want to consider. lots of things can be done. It's whether they can be done legally or easily or be protected.
Have you got any comment about bandwidth for wireless systems versus the resolution for the camera?
The codecs that are currently, although H.264 is a video encoding standard which is now in use. For a high definition video signal, the bandwidth is about, well, the data rate is about 3.6 megabits per second, and that's within the capability of most of your microwave systems, your channels. So I think, yeah, the compression and the capability of the codecs is quite good, and that's why when we're talking about the 31 days being held on one SD card, it arises from that new compression or the new codec technology. Yeah. So it can work, and it does work.